The restaurant was buzzing with the sound of cutlery clinking, glasses chiming, and the low hum of conversations. Waiters in pressed black uniforms rushed between tables, balancing trays of steaming dishes, their faces tight with forced politeness. Among them was Emma, a young woman of 28, her once bright eyes dulled with exhaustion. Her apron was faded from too many washes, and her swollen belly pushed against the thin fabric of her uniform. Every step was heavy, not only because of the pregnancy, but because of the shame she carried like an invisible weight. It had been months since Andrew, her ex-husband, had abandoned her. Months since he traded her for the glitter of wealth, parties, and a younger mistress who fit neatly into the shallow world he craved. Emma had been left with nothing, no money, no family support, only the growing life inside her. To survive, she had taken this job waiting tables in a mid-range downtown restaurant. She endured long hours on her aching feet, ignoring the whispers of coworkers who pitied her and the judgmental stares of customers who noticed her belly before they noticed her face. But nothing compared to tonight. Because tonight, fate had seated Andrew Weston, her ex-husband, right at one of her tables. He looked different from the man she remembered. His hair was styled sharp and slick, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, his watch gleaming under the restaurant lights. A woman sat next to him, his new girlfriend, barely 23, all curves and confidence, her manicured hand draped over his arm like a trophy. Around them sat a small circle of friends, equally polished, equally cruel in the way they laughed too loudly at Andrew's jokes. Emma's heart sank when she realized she would have to serve them. She wanted to run, to hide in the bathroom until her shift ended, but her manager's eyes were on her, and quitting wasn't an option. Rent was due in a week. Formula, diapers, those weren't free. She steadied her breathing, grabbed her notepad, and approached the table with as much dignity as she could muster. "Good evening," she said softly, forcing a polite smile. "Can I take your order?" For a moment, Andrew didn't even recognize her. He glanced up, eyes narrowing as if trying to place her face. Then recognition hit, and his lips twisted into a smirk. "Well, well," he said loudly, making sure the whole table could hear. "If it isn't Emma? My ex-wife, serving tables now, are we?" The laughter that followed was like a knife slicing through Emma's chest. The young girlfriend giggled, covering her mouth with fake modesty. One of Andrew's friends raised an eyebrow, clearly entertained by the unfolding scene. Emma swallowed hard. "What would you like to order?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. But Andrew wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of wine like a king on a throne. "Tell me, Emma," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "How's the baby?" "Oh, right. I suppose you expect me to believe it's mine? Or did you find some other poor fool?" The words hit her like a slap. Heat rushed to her cheeks, her eyes burned, but she stood frozen, unable to speak. Every customer at the nearby tables was staring now. Some whispered, some shook their heads. The humiliation was unbearable. The young girlfriend leaned in, her voice sharp and cruel. "Honestly, Andrew, she looks pathetic. I mean, a pregnant waitress? That's tragic." The table erupted in laughter again. Emma wanted the ground to open and swallow her whole. She wanted to scream, to shout the truth, that the baby was his, that she had given up everything for him, that she had once believed in his promises. But her throat closed up. Her hands trembled. And then, just as she thought she couldn't endure another second, something shifted in the room. The air grew heavier. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned toward the entrance. A tall man in a tailored suit had just walked in. His presence was commanding, the kind that made people straighten in their seats without knowing why. Broad shoulders, sharp features, eyes that seemed to pierce straight through walls. He was followed by two discreet bodyguards, though he didn't need them. His aura alone demanded respect. Emma barely noticed him at first. She was too lost in her shame. But Andrew noticed. His smirk faltered. The girlfriend's hand slipped nervously from his arm. Whispers spread quickly through the restaurant. Daniel Grant, the billionaire, the man whose face graced magazine covers, whose fortune built empires, whose every move was dissected by the press. And Daniel Grant's eyes had just fallen on Emma. He didn't look away. He didn't blink. He studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Andrew shifted in his seat, trying to regain composure. "What's he doing here?" he muttered under his breath, but his friends didn't answer. They were just as stunned. Daniel began walking toward their table. Each step was measured, deliberate, the click of his shoes echoing in the silence. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea why a man like him would even notice her, a struggling waitress with nothing to offer. But when he stopped right in front of Andrew's table, she realized this moment was not coincidence. Andrew gave a forced laugh, trying to mask his discomfort. "Mr. Grant, what an honor. Didn't expect to see you here." But Daniel didn't look at him. His gaze remained locked on Emma. Slowly he reached out, took her trembling hand in his, and said in a voice that carried through the entire restaurant, "She's my wife." The room erupted in gasps. Andrew's jaw dropped. The girlfriend choked on her drink. Emma's world spun, her mind reeling with disbelief. And in that frozen moment, no one could tell whether Emma had just been saved or thrown into a storm she never saw coming. Emma Weston had once believed in fairy tales. Not the kind with glass slippers or castles, but the quiet, ordinary dream of building a life with someone who promised to love her. When she married Andrew Weston 5 years ago, she thought she had found her happy ending. He was charming, ambitious, and whispered promises of forever. She gave him her trust, her loyalty, and her heart. Back then, she was not a waitress in a cramped diner. She was a woman who kept a tidy home, hosted dinner parties for Andrew's colleagues, and spent her nights planning a family with the man she adored. She had been proud to support him, proud to believe in his rising career in finance. Whenever he came home late, reeking of whiskey and exhaustion, she convinced herself it was for their future. Whenever he dismissed her dreams, her longing to open a small flower shop, her love of painting, she swallowed her desires and told herself sacrifices were part of marriage. She had believed, she had trusted, she had built her world around him, but worlds built on lies always crumble. The first crack appeared when Andrew's affection began to wane. He no longer looked at her with warmth, no longer reached for her hand in public. Conversations turned cold. Arguments sprouted like weeds. She thought it was stress, that if she gave him time he would return to the man she knew. But then came the ultimate betrayal. The mistress. A girl barely out of college, flaunting on social media the very lifestyle Emma had built for Andrew. Suddenly, Emma wasn't a partner. She was a burden, an obstacle in his way. When she discovered she was pregnant, she thought it might change things. She thought Andrew would soften, that he would see the life they had created together and choose to stay. But instead, he delivered the cruelest blow of all. "This isn't what I want," he had told her, his voice dripping with disdain. "You trapped me, Emma. I won't raise a child with you." And with that, he was gone. The months that followed were the darkest of Emma's life. Alone, carrying a child, she realized just how little she had. Andrew had frozen the bank accounts, leaving her scrambling for rent. Friends she once entertained at lavish dinners stopped answering her calls. Even her parents, worn down by years of disappointment, were distant. She was utterly alone, except for the baby she carried. That baby became her reason to wake up every morning. When despair threatened to drown her, she would press her hands to her belly and whisper, "I'll protect you. I'll survive for you." So she took the only job she could find, waiting tables at a mid-tier restaurant. The pay was barely enough, the shifts grueling, but she endured. She endured the swollen feet, the aching back, the whispers of judgment from customers who saw her belly before they saw her humanity. She endured the pity of coworkers who thought she was doomed. Every night she came home to a small, dim apartment where the walls were too thin and the air smelled of old paint. She would collapse onto her second-hand couch, cradle her belly, and dream of a different life. Not wealth, not luxury, just safety. Just peace. But safety felt impossible when the father of her child was a man who despised her. That night at the restaurant, when Andrew mocked her in front of strangers, all those wounds reopened. The humiliation wasn't new, it was a familiar burn, but it cut deeper with every word. Because Andrew wasn't just mocking her, he was mocking the baby, the life inside her. And that was Emma's breaking point. She could endure personal shame, she could survive poverty, but the thought of her child being ridiculed, dismissed as a mistake, that was unbearable. Her eyes had welled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't collapse, not in front of him, not in front of everyone. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but years of silence had trained her to stay small, to swallow her voice. Until Daniel Grant appeared. The billionaire's sudden claim, "She's my wife," had thrown her into shock. Emma didn't know him. She had never even seen him up close before. To her, he was a name in headlines, a man untouchable, as far from her world as the stars in the sky. So why had he spoken those words? Why had he looked at her like he had known her all his life? Her knees had nearly buckled under the weight of it. For the first time in months, she felt the piercing spotlight of hope, but tangled with it was fear. Because nothing in Emma's life came without cost. And men with power always had their reasons. That night, as the restaurant buzzed with whispers and shocked stares, Emma's heart pounded not just with confusion but with something she hadn't felt in years: possibility. Could this be real? Could someone truly see her, defend her, and shield her child from the cruelty of the world? Or was this the beginning of another cruel trick, another heartbreak waiting to shatter her fragile strength? Emma's hand instinctively rested on her belly, a silent promise to her unborn child. She couldn't let herself hope too much. She couldn't trust too easily. Not again. And yet, when Daniel's eyes locked with hers, steady and unflinching, a spark flickered in her chest. It terrified her. It thrilled her. It made her wonder if her life was about to change in ways she could never predict. What Emma didn't know was that Daniel's declaration was only the beginning, and that the truth behind his words would shake everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and survival. The restaurant where Emma worked wasn't glamorous, but it had aspirations. Dark wood panels lined the walls, chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the aroma of butter, garlic, and wine clung to the air. It was the kind of place where middle-class families splurged for anniversaries, where couples proposed over crème brûlée, and where businessmen took clients to impress them without reaching the price tags of elite dining. For Emma, it was just a job, a place where she could earn enough tips to cover rent, groceries, and doctor appointments. She never felt the glitter. She only felt the ache of her swollen feet, the sting of grease burns on her arms, and the constant hum of stress. But tonight, under the chandeliers and soft jazz music, the restaurant became something else entirely. A stage, a battlefield. At the center of it all was Andrew. He sat at the largest round table, near the window that overlooked the glittering skyline. His laughter was louder than the music, his gestures grand, as though he wanted the entire room to notice him. Around him were men in tailored suits and women in shimmering dresses, clinking glasses of champagne that cost more than Emma's weekly paycheck. They were the world Andrew now belonged to, the world of money, status, and cruel amusement. Emma hovered at the edge of their table, notebook in hand, forcing herself not to shrink under the weight of their stares. She could feel every eye on her, judging, mocking, dissecting her swollen belly and faded uniform. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a joke, and Andrew made sure of it. "This place is decent," he said loudly, smirking as if he owned the restaurant. "But can you imagine? My ex-wife serving us. Life has a sense of humor, doesn't it?" The group erupted in laughter, glasses raised. Emma's stomach twisted. She wanted to disappear into the shadows, but she had no choice. She scribbled down their orders, her pen trembling. The girlfriend leaned across the table, her diamond necklace glittering under the chandelier. "Do you think she'll get the order right?" she asked, her voice dripping with false innocence. "I mean, pregnancy brain is real, isn't it?" Another round of laughter. Emma's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. As she walked back toward the kitchen, she caught glimpses of other diners watching the scene unfold. A middle-aged couple whispered behind their menus. The young woman shook her head in pity. Emma hated the pity most of all. She didn't want their sympathy, she wanted her dignity. In the kitchen, steam hissed, pans clattered, and chefs shouted orders. But Emma couldn't hear any of it over the pounding of her heart. Her hands shook as she clipped the order to the line. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a moment. "You can do this. Just one night. Just survive this one night." But survival felt impossible when every step back into the dining room dragged her closer to Andrew's cruelty. The contrast was suffocating. Here she was, Emma, in a cheap uniform that smelled of onions and detergent, barely scraping by, her swollen feet aching in budget shoes. And there was Andrew, draped in wealth, surrounded by glittering people who saw him as charming, successful, untouchable. The restaurant wasn't just a place to eat tonight. It was reflecting the gulf between who she had been and who she was now. And standing at that gulf, mocking her from across the divide, was the man who had once promised to love her. She returned to the table with water glasses balanced on a tray. Andrew smirked as she approached. "Careful," he said mockingly. "Don't drop them. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself." Oh wait, too late. The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel, cutting deeper than the clink of crystal. Emma set the glasses down with trembling hands. She wanted to shout, to fight back, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she stood silent, her dignity shredded piece by piece. Then came the moment that changed everything. The heavy glass doors at the entrance opened, and Daniel Grant walked in. He didn't belong in this restaurant. He belonged in five-star hotels, at private galas, in penthouses with skyline views. His presence made the chandeliers seem dim, the wealthy diners seem small. Conversations hushed, forks froze mid-air, as people turned to stare. Emma barely noticed him at first. She was too focused on surviving Andrew's next insult. But the room noticed. The energy shifted, thick and electric, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Andrew noticed too. His smirk faltered. He straightened in his chair, suddenly less sure of himself. His girlfriend whispered something nervously, her eyes wide. Because Daniel Grant was not just a billionaire. He was the billionaire. The kind whose name carried weight in boardrooms and headlines. The kind whose fortune could build or break entire empires. And for reasons Emma couldn't fathom, his eyes landed on her. She felt it before she even looked up. That piercing gaze, steady and unflinching, as if he could see straight through her. Her heart skipped, her breath caught. Why was he looking at her? Andrew shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain his confidence. "Well, look who it is," he muttered to his friends. "The king himself. What's he doing here?" Daniel began to walk toward their table, his footsteps slow, deliberate, each one echoing louder than the laughter had moments ago. The restaurant seemed to shrink around him. Emma froze, tray in hand, as he approached. She had no idea why a man like him would even notice her, a waitress drowning in humiliation. But then he stopped right in front of Andrew's table. The silence was deafening. Andrew forced a smile. "Mr. Grant, what a surprise. Didn't expect to see you here tonight." But Daniel didn't look at Andrew. He didn't look at the glittering guests, or the girlfriend, or the champagne glasses. His eyes were locked only on Emma. And in that moment, the restaurant, the battlefield, the mirror of humiliation, became something else entirely. It became the stage for a revelation that would change Emma's life forever. Because Daniel Grant opened his mouth, and the words he spoke would shake the very foundation of that glittering table, and Emma's entire world. Andrew Weston had always loved the spotlight. Even when Emma first met him, he thrived on attention. He was the man who dominated conversations, who turned every gathering into his personal stage. Back then, Emma mistook his confidence for strength, his arrogance for ambition. She believed he was a man who would build a future, a protector, someone worth following. But Andrew Weston wasn't a protector. He was a predator. In his eyes, people were only valuable as long as they served his ego. Emma had been useful once. She had provided stability, loyalty, a home. She had cheered him on when he was still clawing his way up the corporate ladder. She had sacrificed her own dreams so he could chase his. But once he reached the next rung, once his world expanded to wealthier circles, Emma no longer fit the image he wanted to project. She wasn't glamorous enough. She wasn't wealthy enough. She wasn't shiny enough for his new stage, so he discarded her. Now, sitting at the center of the restaurant with his glass of champagne, Andrew basked in the laughter of his friends. His smirk was wide, his voice loud, because cruelty gave him power. Humiliating Emma wasn't enough. He wanted an audience for it. "Isn't it ironic," he said, raising his glass high. "The woman who once played the perfect wife now wipes tables and serves drinks. Life has a way of putting people where they belong." His friends roared with laughter, clinking glasses. The young girlfriend leaned into him, stroking his arm as if rewarding him for his cruelty. Emma stood frozen, her cheeks flushed, her throat tight. But Andrew wasn't done. He thrived on breaking her down piece by piece. "Tell me, Emma," he continued, his tone dripping with venom, Do you tell your customers the truth? That you're pregnant and abandoned? Or do you let them think there's some lucky man waiting at home for you? Gasps rippled through nearby tables. Strangers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. They all knew this wasn't just dinner conversation. It was an execution. Emma's hands shook as she gripped her notepad. She wanted to scream, but fear silenced her. Fear of his voice, fear of the past, fear of the memories of every time he had told her she was worthless. Andrew leaned back, savoring her silence. "Look at her," he said to his friends. "She can't even defend herself, always so weak, always so small. Honestly, I should have left her sooner." That was Andrew's weapon. Words sharp enough to pierce flesh, delivered with a smile that convinced the world he was joking. But Emma knew the truth. He meant every word. He had meant it the night he walked out, leaving her with nothing but bills and a broken heart. He had meant it when he told her she was a burden. He had meant it when he accused her of trapping him with a baby. The baby. Andrew's cruelty reached its lowest point when he turned his attention to the life growing inside her. "By the way," he said suddenly, his eyes gleaming with malice, "who's the father? Are we even sure? Because I don't recall agreeing to this little project." The table howled with laughter. The girlfriend clutched his arm, giggling as if mocking a pregnant woman was the height of entertainment. Emma's chest tightened. She pressed her hand against her belly instinctively, shielding her child from his words. Her vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't give him the satisfaction. Andrew smirked, satisfied with the destruction he was causing. This was the man he truly was, heartless, selfish, intoxicated by the sound of his own cruelty. But then, something shifted. The sound of footsteps, the hush of the restaurant, the shadow of Daniel Grant looming over the table. Andrew's laughter faltered when he realized everyone's attention had shifted, not to him, but to the billionaire standing beside them. "Mr. Grant," Andrew said quickly, forcing a laugh. "What an honor. Please, join us. We were just—" Daniel cut him off with a glance so cold it made the champagne glasses tremble. He didn't speak to Andrew. He didn't acknowledge the friends or the girlfriend. His eyes were locked only on Emma. And then he spoke the words that silenced the room. "She's my wife." The declaration landed like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the air. Emma's heart stopped. Andrew's jaw dropped. His girlfriend's smile vanished. For the first time in his life, Andrew Weston had been upstaged. The spotlight he craved had been stolen, and not by a peer or a rival, but by a man infinitely more powerful, infinitely more respected. And worse, Daniel had claimed Emma. The woman Andrew thought he had destroyed, the woman he believed beneath him, had just been elevated in front of everyone. Andrew's smirk vanished. His eyes narrowed, fury flashing behind them. Because in that moment, he realized something terrifying. He was no longer in control of the game. And for a man like Andrew Weston, losing control was the one thing he could never forgive. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Daniel Grant's words, "She's my wife," still hung in the air, vibrating like a struck bell. Diners froze mid-bite, waiters paused mid-step, and even the jazz band in the corner faltered, their music trailing off into silence. Emma's heart thundered. She could barely process what had just happened. A billionaire she had never spoken to before had just claimed her as his wife in front of her ex-husband, his new girlfriend, and a crowd of wealthy strangers. It was surreal, unbelievable, like a scene from someone else's life. But Andrew Weston was not the kind of man who surrendered gracefully. He blinked once, twice, his smirk faltering before snapping back into place like a mask. "Your wife?" he repeated, his voice sharp with disbelief. He let out a laugh, too loud, too forced. "Surely you must be mistaken, Mr. Grant. This woman here," he gestured toward Emma with a dismissive flick of his hand, "is my ex-wife. She's nothing more than a waitress now. She doesn't belong to you." The girlfriend snickered beside him, nodding eagerly. "Exactly. Well, just look at her. Do you honestly expect us to believe you would choose her?" Emma's cheeks burned, shame threatening to swallow her whole. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air. But Daniel's hand tightened gently around hers, anchoring her. When she looked up, his eyes were steady, unwavering, filled with a strength she hadn't felt in years. "I don't expect you to believe anything," Daniel said, his voice low but carrying through the room like steel. "I expect you to listen. She is my wife, and I will not tolerate anyone mocking her, or my child." The word child rang like thunder. Gasps rippled through the room. Emma's eyes widened. Andrew's glass of champagne slipped in his hand, spilling golden liquid across the white tablecloth. His friends shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Andrew's face twisted, a storm of rage and fear battling for dominance. Your child," he stammered. "That's impossible. That baby." Daniel cut him off with a sharp glare. "That baby is under my protection. That's all you need to know." For the first time in years, Emma felt a shield around her. She wasn't standing alone in the line of fire anymore. Someone powerful had stepped between her and Andrew's cruelty. But Andrew wasn't ready to back down. His pride couldn't allow it. "You can't be serious," he sneered, his voice rising. "You, Daniel Grant, billionaire, mogul, the man who could have anyone, claiming her? This is a joke. She's nothing. She's trash. She's a mistake I erased from my life." The words sliced through the air, cruel and venomous. The girlfriend laughed, clinging to Andrew's arm, clearly hoping his arrogance would win the crowd back. But it didn't. The diners were no longer laughing. They shifted in their seats, some frowning, some glaring at Andrew with open disgust. His cruelty had gone too far. Daniel's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into a deadly calm that silenced even the whispers. "You erased her from your life? That was your choice. But you don't get to erase her dignity. You don't get to erase her worth. And you will not insult her in front of me again." The restaurant erupted. Not in laughter, but in murmurs of approval. Diners nodded, some even clapped softly. For the first time, Andrew was not the man commanding the room. He was the man being judged. Emma's chest swelled with something unfamiliar. Pride. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the waitress being mocked. She was a woman worth defending. Andrew's face reddened. His mask of arrogance cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the champagne glasses. "You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine?" he roared. The girlfriend flinched, pulling back slightly. His friends shifted uncomfortably, no longer eager to laugh. Daniel didn't flinch. He stood tall, his presence overwhelming. "She was never yours," he said firmly. "Not truly. Because a man who abandons his wife when she needs him most isn't a husband. He's a coward." The word landed like a punch. Andrew's friends averted their eyes. His girlfriend's smile vanished, replaced with unease. Emma's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from the shocking relief of hearing the truth spoken aloud, publicly, undeniably. Andrew, however, was spiraling. His pride, his image, his control, everything was slipping. And Andrew Weston was a man who would burn the world before letting himself be humiliated. He stood suddenly, his chair scraping back with a screech. He pointed at Emma, his hand trembling with fury. "This isn't over. You think you can humiliate me? You think you can make me look weak? I'll destroy you both. You'll regret this." The girlfriend tugged at his sleeve, whispering for him to sit down, but he shook her off violently. His eyes burned with hatred, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "You hear me, Emma? You're nothing without me. Nothing." The room went silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. For a moment, Emma felt that old fear creep back in. The fear of his temper, his cruelty, the fear that he could still control her life. But then Daniel stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Emma and Andrew, his shoulders broad, his presence unshakable. His voice was calm, cold, absolute. "You're wrong," he said. "She's everything, and tonight the world will see exactly how wrong you were to let her go." The room erupted again, this time in applause. Diners clapped, some whistled, their approval crashing like a wave. Emma's tears finally spilled over, but they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of vindication. Andrew's face twisted in rage, his world crumbling around him. His friends avoided his gaze. His girlfriend pulled her hand from his arm, suddenly embarrassed to be seen beside him. For the first time, Andrew Weston looked small. But Emma knew him too well. A man like Andrew wouldn't crumble quietly. He wouldn't accept defeat. Not here, not now. And as he stormed out of the restaurant, his eyes full of venom, Emma realized this was only the beginning of the war he was about to wage. The applause in the restaurant still echoed in Emma's ears long after Andrew stormed out. People had clapped, strangers had defended her with their approval, and for a moment she had felt something she hadn't felt in years: dignity. Yet as the noise faded, as the adrenaline drained from her veins, she felt the crushing weight of reality press down on her. Because applause didn't pay rent. Applause didn't erase the years of wounds Andrew had carved into her. And applause didn't guarantee that Daniel Grant's sudden claim, "She's my wife," was anything more than a performance, a gesture, a game she couldn't understand. When the crowd settled back into their meals and the whispers began to fade, Emma felt herself trembling. She excused herself from Daniel's side, muttering something about needing a moment. She pushed through the kitchen doors, into the heat and chaos of clattering pans and shouting chefs, but even there she couldn't breathe. Her chest felt tight, her throat closing. She rushed past the rows of steaming stoves, through the back hallway, and into the dim, cramped staff bathroom. The door clicked shut and she collapsed against it, her whole body shaking. For a moment, she couldn't stop the sobs. They tore out of her chest, raw and unrestrained. She pressed her hands to her belly, gasping for air, terrified that her breakdown might somehow hurt the child inside her. "I can't do this," she thought desperately. "I can't survive this war." The image of Andrew's twisted face haunted her. The venom in his voice, the way he had pointed at her with such hatred, it was burned into her memory. She knew him too well. He wasn't done. He would come after her. He would find ways to ruin her life even further, to make her regret standing in that restaurant with her head held high for even a second. And then there was Daniel. Why had he done it? Why had a billionaire, a man she had never met, stood in front of the entire restaurant and claimed her as his wife? What did he want from her? What did he expect her to give in return? Her heart wanted to believe he had done it out of kindness, out of some sense of justice. But Emma had been burned too many times to trust easily. Men like Daniel Grant didn't move without reason. His world was one of power plays, deals, and hidden agendas. She was terrified that she had just become a piece in a game far larger than herself. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to her unborn child. "I'm trying," she choked. "I'm trying so hard to protect you, but I don't know if I can do this anymore. I'm so tired." The bathroom mirror reflected a version of herself she barely recognized. Pale skin, hollow eyes, hair pulled back messily under her waitress cap. A woman worn down, broken, carrying not just a child but years of betrayal and loneliness. She touched the glass, staring at her reflection as if asking that woman for strength. Memories flooded in, the nights she had spent alone in her apartment, counting pennies to buy food. The nights she had lain awake, hand on her belly, wondering if her baby would grow up with a father's love or with shame. The nights she had begged Andrew to see her, to love her, only to be met with cold laughter. The dam broke. She slid to the floor, curling around her belly, sobbing quietly so no one outside would hear. For the first time, she admitted what she had always been too afraid to say. "I feel worthless. I feel broken. I feel like nothing." Minutes passed, maybe longer. She didn't know. All she knew was the silence of the bathroom, the sound of her own ragged breaths, and the faint thump of her baby's kicks as if reminding her, "I'm here. I need you." That reminder cut through the darkness like a blade of light. She pressed her palm firmly against her belly, grounding herself. Her baby was innocent. Her baby was the reason she couldn't give up, no matter how broken she felt. But even as she found a sliver of strength, the fear remained. Andrew wouldn't stop. He would come for her reputation, her job, her very stability. And Daniel, what role would he play? Was he truly a protector, or was he just another powerful man who would use her pain for his advantage? A knock startled her. She wiped her tears quickly, trying to steady her voice. "Emma?" It was her coworker, Sarah, a kind girl who had always covered for her when Emma was too sick to finish a shift. "Are you okay? You've been in there a while." "I'm fine," Emma lied, her voice trembling. "I just needed a moment." But Sarah's voice was gentle, filled with worry. "Everyone saw what happened out there. That man, your ex, he's awful. But Daniel Grant, Emma, he looked at you like you were the only person in the room." Emma's breath caught. Her heart wanted to cling to those words, to believe them, but her mind warned her not to. She couldn't afford false hope. Not again. When she finally stepped back into the hallway, her face washed and her tears hidden, she found Daniel waiting near the kitchen doors. His broad frame leaned casually against the wall, but his eyes were sharp, watching her like a hawk. She froze, unsure what to say. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, with questions too heavy to voice. Daniel straightened, his gaze softening slightly when he saw the redness around her eyes. He didn't comment on it. Instead, he said quietly, "You don't have to face him alone anymore." Emma's heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself lean into the promise of protection. But every scar Andrew left behind screamed at her to be careful. Because trust, for Emma, was the most dangerous gamble of all. And as Daniel reached out his hand once more, Emma had to decide. Would she step into the unknown with him, or retreat back into the loneliness she already knew? Emma stared at Daniel's outstretched hand. It was steady, firm, commanding, as if he was offering her not just support, but a lifeline. Yet for Emma, that lifeline was tangled with suspicion. Why would a billionaire, a man who could silence entire boardrooms with a glance, risk his reputation for her? Why had he stood in front of her ex-husband and claimed her as his wife? She hesitated, her eyes flicking from his hand to his face. Daniel didn't push. He simply waited, his expression calm but unreadable, as though he knew she was wrestling with questions too heavy for words. Finally, she whispered, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, his gaze holding hers. "Because I don't stand by and watch people I care about get destroyed." Her breath caught. People I care about. The words wrapped around her like a shield, yet they also confused her. How could he care about her? They barely knew each other. Before she could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and Sarah slipped out, arms full of plates. She glanced at the two of them, her eyes wide with curiosity, then hurried past without a word. The brief interruption gave Emma the excuse she needed to retreat. "I should get back to work," she said quickly, stepping around him. But Daniel's voice followed her, low and resolute. "This isn't just about tonight, Emma. There are things you don't know. Things you deserve to know." The words sent a chill down her spine. That night, after the restaurant closed and the last of the customers had left, Emma found Daniel waiting outside. His sleek black car gleamed under the streetlights, a stark contrast to the dimly lit alley where employees exited. She tried to walk past him, clutching her coat tighter, but he stepped forward. "Let me drive you home," he said. She shook her head. "I can manage." "It's not safe," he countered. His tone wasn't controlling, it was protective, a quiet command wrapped in concern. Reluctantly, she agreed. The ride was silent at first, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Emma sat stiffly, her hands folded over her belly, her mind racing with questions. Finally, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "You owe me an explanation." Daniel's hands tightened briefly on the steering wheel. His jaw worked as if he were deciding how much truth to reveal. Then he exhaled slowly. "Years ago," he began, his voice low, "I made a mistake that cost me someone I cared about deeply. I promised myself I'd never stand by again while someone innocent suffered because of a man's arrogance." Emma turned to look at him, her brow furrowed. "What does that have to do with me?" Daniel's eyes flicked to hers, steady and piercing. "Because I know what Andrew is, and I know what men like him can do if they aren't stopped." Her chest tightened. "You don't even know me." Daniel's lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. "You're wrong. I've known about you longer than you realize." Emma's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "I knew Andrew before you did." The words hit her like a blow. "What?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes stayed on the road, but his voice was steady. "He used to work for a company I acquired years ago. I saw the kind of man he was back then. Selfish, reckless, desperate for validation. He hated me because I saw through him. When I learned later that he married, I felt sorry for the woman who had tied herself to him. I didn't know it was you. Not until tonight." Emma's mind spun. The puzzle pieces didn't fit. "So you defended me because you knew what he was like?" Daniel's voice dropped lower. "No. I defended you because I won't let him destroy you the way he's destroyed others. And because," he paused, his grip on the wheel tightening, "because your child deserves better than the lies Andrew will spread. You deserve better." Her throat tightened with emotion she didn't want to feel. She wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need saving, but part of her, the broken, tired part, longed to believe his words. Still, suspicion gnawed at her. "What's in this for you?" Daniel glanced at her, his eyes fierce and unflinching. Maybe I want redemption. Maybe I want to make things right. Or maybe—" his gaze softened. "Maybe I see something in you, Emma, that you've forgotten about yourself." Silence fell, heavy and charged. Emma turned away, staring out the window as city lights streaked past. Her heart pounded, her mind torn between fear and fragile hope. When they reached her apartment, Daniel parked but didn't immediately unlock the doors. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Andrew won't stop, Emma. He'll come after you, your job, your child. He'll twist the story until the world believes his lies. But he won't win if you let me stand by your side." Emma's breath trembled. She wanted to say yes to accept the protection he offered, but the scars Andrew left made trust impossible. She shook her head slightly. "I don't know if I can trust you." Daniel leaned closer, his voice steady and certain. "Then let me prove it." For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The air between them was thick, electric, filled with something Emma couldn't name. Finally, she opened the car door, stepping out into the cold night. She turned back, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need another man to save me." Daniel's eyes softened, but his words carried weight. "I'm not here to save you, Emma. I'm here to remind you that you were never as weak as he made you believe." Her heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she could be strong again. But as she walked toward her apartment, she saw a shadow lurking near the corner of the building. A figure smoking, watching. Her blood ran cold. Even in the dim light, she recognized the outline: Andrew. And in that moment, Emma realized the war Daniel warned her about had already begun. The night she saw Andrew lurking near her apartment, Emma barely made it inside before her knees gave out. She locked the door, pressed her back against it, and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, her heart racing. The shadows outside reminded her that her past wasn't finished with her. Not yet. Andrew would never let her go quietly. But instead of collapsing completely, something strange stirred inside her. For the first time, instead of drowning in fear, she felt something sharper. Anger. Anger at Andrew for abandoning her. Anger for mocking her. Anger for daring to threaten the life growing inside her. She had spent months swallowing her pain, trying to survive quietly, but survival wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to fight. The next morning, she stood in front of her mirror. Her reflection looked tired, worn, fragile, but her eyes burned with something new. She whispered to herself, "No more." That day marked the beginning of Emma's transformation. It wasn't dramatic at first. She didn't suddenly become fearless. She still cried sometimes, still woke from nightmares of Andrew's voice. But little by little, she began to reclaim pieces of herself. She started with her appearance, not for vanity but for armor. She saved a portion of her tips and went to a second-hand boutique, buying a few dresses that fit her growing belly yet made her feel strong, radiant. She let Sarah take her to a salon, where for the first time in years, she got her hair trimmed, styled softly around her face. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the broken woman Andrew mocked. She saw a mother, a survivor, a woman stepping into a new chapter. But the real change was inside. Daniel helped, though he never pushed. True to his word, he began proving himself, not by making grand promises, but by showing up. When Andrew tried to smear her name online, Daniel quietly had the posts removed and the accounts traced. When Andrew sent a lawyer's notice attempting to contest the pregnancy, Daniel made sure Emma had one of the best legal teams in the city standing by her side. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked him one evening as they sat in his office, papers spread out before them. Daniel looked at her with that same steady gaze. "Because you deserve to see your own strength. I can clear the path, Emma, but only you can walk it." Those words stuck with her. They became her mantra. At the diner, she began holding her head higher, shoulders back, no longer shrinking when customers stared at her belly. When Andrew's friends came in to sneer, she met their eyes with calm defiance. She stopped apologizing for existing. The staff noticed. Sarah whispered one day, "You're glowing, Emma. Like a different person." Emma smiled, a real smile she hadn't felt in years. "Maybe I'm finally remembering who I am." Her transformation reached its peak the night Daniel invited her to a charity gala. At first, Emma refused. The thought of stepping into a glittering room filled with wealth and judgment made her stomach churn. But Daniel insisted gently, "This isn't about them. This is about you walking into a room that once belonged only to men like Andrew and showing them you're not invisible. She almost said no. But then she thought of her baby. She wanted her child to grow up seeing her not as a victim, but as someone who stood tall despite the world's cruelty. So she said yes. The night of the gala, Emma stood before her mirror once again, but this time the woman staring back was transformed. She wore a deep navy gown that hugged her curves and draped elegantly over her belly. Her hair shone in loose waves. Her eyes, once hollow, now burned with quiet strength. She looked radiant, powerful, untouchable. When Daniel arrived to escort her, his expression softened with something almost reverent. "You're stunning," he said simply. Her heart fluttered, but she steadied herself. Tonight wasn't about romance. Tonight was about reclaiming her dignity. The gala was held in a grand ballroom, chandeliers glittering, cameras flashing. The moment Emma entered on Daniel's arm, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some recognized her as Andrew's ex-wife, some judged, some pitied, but many simply stared in awe at the woman who carried herself with such quiet authority. And then, as if fate demanded it, Andrew was there. He stood across the room, glass in hand, his face pale when he saw her. His eyes widened, his smirk faltering as he took in her transformation. This was not the Emma he had mocked in a waitress uniform. This was not the broken woman he had discarded. This was someone reborn, glowing, fierce, unshakable. Emma met his gaze without flinching. For the first time, she felt no fear, only power. Andrew stormed toward her, his voice sharp with disbelief. "What are you doing here? You don't belong in this world." The crowd quieted, watching. Cameras turned. The moment was electric. Emma lifted her chin. Her voice was steady, strong. "This world doesn't belong to you either, Andrew. It belongs to those who know their worth." Gasps echoed. Daniel's hand brushed hers lightly, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. Andrew sputtered, rage boiling under his skin. "You think you can embarrass me again? You think standing here in a borrowed dress changes what you are?" Emma's lips curved into a faint smile. "No, Andrew, it changes what you are." Exposed. The room buzzed with whispers, people nodding, some even clapping softly. For the first time, Andrew looked small, not because Daniel had spoken, but because Emma herself had risen. The transformation was complete. The woman once mocked was now commanding the room, her voice carrying like fire. But Emma knew this wasn't the end. Andrew's eyes burned with hatred, his fists clenched, his pride wounded beyond repair. And as he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss, Emma realized he was about to reveal a secret so dark it could shatter everything she had rebuilt. The ballroom buzzed with whispers as Andrew closed in on Emma, his face twisted with fury. His voice was low, sharp, dripping with venom. "You think this little show changes anything? You're still nothing. You're still weak. And I know secrets, Emma. Secrets that will destroy you if you keep playing this game." Emma didn't flinch. For the first time, she didn't shrink from his threats. She held her ground, her gaze steady, her posture regal in the navy gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. Daniel was beside her, silent but powerful, his presence like a wall of stone. The crowd sensed the tension, their whispers growing louder. Phones came out, cameras discreetly raised. Everyone could feel it. Something monumental was about to happen. Andrew sneered, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "You all look at her like she's some kind of angel. But don't be fooled. This woman, she trapped me with a child. She lied, she manipulated, she dragged me down. She's nothing but a parasite." Gasps erupted around the room. Emma's chest tightened, but this time she didn't look away. She stepped forward. Her voice rang clear, steady, slicing through the murmurs. "No, Andrew, the only parasite here is you." The crowd stilled. All eyes locked on Emma. Her words carried years of buried pain, sharpened now into strength. "You left me when I was most vulnerable. You mocked me while I carried a life you refused to take responsibility for. You tried to erase me, humiliate me, destroy me. But tonight," she swept her gaze across the room, her voice rising, "tonight everyone will see the truth." Daniel stepped forward, his presence commanding. He pulled a sleek black folder from the inside pocket of his suit. The room hushed instantly, all eyes on him. "Mr. Weston," Daniel said coldly, "you should be careful when you speak of lies, because I happen to have proof of yours." Andrew stiffened, color draining from his face. "What are you talking about?" Daniel opened the folder and pulled out documents, contracts, bank statements, photographs. He held them up for the crowd to see. For years, Andrew Weston has been siphoning money from companies he worked with. Fraud, embezzlement, betrayal, and tonight, I make it public. Shockwaves rippled through the crowd. Gasps, whispers, phones snapping pictures. Andrew's mask of arrogance cracked, panic flashing in his eyes. "You can't do this," he spat, his voice shaking. "You have no right." Daniel's voice cut through him like steel. "I have every right, because men like you destroy lives without consequence. But not anymore." Emma stepped forward, her voice strong. "You wanted to make me small, Andrew. But tonight, you're the one exposed, not as a husband, not as a man, but as a fraud. And everyone here will remember it." The crowd erupted in murmurs, then applause. People clapped, some even cheered. The sound grew louder, a tidal wave of justice washing over the ballroom. Andrew stumbled back, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His girlfriend pulled away from him, her eyes wide with horror. His so-called friends turned their backs, whispering in disgust. "No," Andrew hissed, his voice cracking. "This isn't real. He's lying." But Daniel's evidence was undeniable. He handed copies to journalists already pulling out recorders and cameras. Within minutes, the story would be everywhere. The mighty Andrew Weston, the man who mocked, humiliated, and abandoned, was falling, and Emma stood tall, radiant, no longer his victim. The applause swelled, filling the ballroom like thunder. Emma's eyes burned with tears, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of triumph. Andrew's voice broke, desperate. "Emma, listen to me." She cut him off, her voice firm, unshakable. "No, Andrew, you don't get to speak my name anymore." The crowd roared with approval. Cameras flashed, the story was sealed. Emma turned, Daniel beside her, and together they walked toward the exit, the crowd parting for them like royalty. For the first time in years, Emma felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced her tormentor. She had won. But as they stepped outside into the cool night air, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. Emma frowned. "What is it?" Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket, his jaw set. "Andrew won't accept defeat. That much I know. And this." He looked out into the night, his eyes sharp. "This was only the first battle. The war isn't over yet." Emma's breath caught. She wanted to believe the nightmare was finished, that justice had been done. But deep down, she knew Daniel was right. Andrew wasn't the type to vanish quietly. And as the flash of a camera from across the street caught her eye, paparazzi snapping photos already spreading to the world, Emma realized her fight had just moved to a bigger stage than she ever imagined. The morning after the gala, Emma woke to a flood of notifications. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with messages, missed calls, and headlines. She scrolled, her hands trembling. Exposed: Andrew Weston's double life. Fraud, lies, betrayal, the truth about Weston. Waitress turned heroine confronts ex-husband in front of Billionaire. Her face was everywhere. On gossip blogs, in news feeds, across social media. Strangers called her brave, resilient, inspiring. Some criticized, some doubted, but for the first time, the world wasn't laughing at her. They were listening. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, hand resting on her belly, tears streaming down her face. These weren't tears of fear or humiliation, they were tears of relief. She whispered to her child, "We made it. We're finally free." But Daniel's warning echoed in her mind. This was only the first battle. And he was right. Andrew didn't disappear quietly. In the days following the gala, he tried to claw back his reputation. He gave interviews, insisting the documents were fake. He painted himself as the victim, claiming Emma and Daniel had conspired against him. But the evidence Daniel released was overwhelming. Bank accounts frozen, investigations launched, former associates testifying against him. The empire Andrew had built on lies crumbled, piece by piece. Meanwhile, Emma rose. The diner where she once hid behind an apron became a place of admiration. Customers came not just for coffee and pie, but to see the woman who had stood up to a man like Andrew. Some left flowers, some slipped notes of encouragement onto her table. Her coworkers treated her with newfound respect, no longer pitying her but admiring her strength. And Daniel, he was there, always nearby, not to overshadow her, but to steady her. He became her partner, not just in the fight against Andrew, but in rebuilding her life. One evening, as they walked through the city, Daniel stopped at a quiet park. The autumn leaves crunched underfoot, and the air was crisp. Emma pulled her coat tighter, her belly round and prominent now. Daniel turned to her, his gaze steady. "Emma, I didn't stand up for you because I pitied you. I stood up because I saw your worth, even when you didn't. You've carried yourself with more strength than most people I know, and I—" He hesitated, his voice softening. "I've fallen for you." Emma's breath caught. The world seemed to pause around her. She had spent so long believing she was unworthy of love, so long drowning in Andrew's cruelty, that hearing those words felt impossible. But looking into Daniel's eyes, she saw truth, not pity, not a savior's arrogance, love. Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "Then I'll wait. For as long as it takes, just know, you'll never be alone again." It wasn't a grand, sweeping declaration. It was better. It was steady, patient, real. Months passed. Andrew's trial began, splashed across every headline. Emma was called to testify. The courtroom was cold, intimidating, but when she took the stand, she didn't shake. She spoke her truth clearly, her voice unwavering. She told the world what he had done, not to shame herself, but to expose him. The jury listened. The evidence was damning. In the end, Andrew Weston was found guilty. Fraud, embezzlement, slander. His sentence was years in prison, his fortune stripped, his reputation ruined beyond repair. The man who once mocked her in a crowded restaurant now stood in chains, powerless. Emma walked out of the courthouse with Daniel by her side. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but she held her head high. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a survivor, a mother, a woman who had reclaimed her dignity. Weeks later, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Holding her child in her arms, she felt a surge of love so powerful it erased every scar Andrew had left behind. She named her Hope. Because that's what her daughter represented. The future, the strength to rise again, the promise that pain could lead to something beautiful. Daniel was there, holding her hand through every moment. When he cradled baby Hope for the first time, his eyes softened, and Emma saw the life she had once thought impossible. A family built not on lies or cruelty, but on love and respect. In time, Emma accepted what her heart already knew. One quiet evening, as the sun set over the city, she told Daniel, "You were right. I wasn't as weak as I thought, and I think I'm ready to believe in love again." His smile was tender, his kiss gentle, and for the first time in years, Emma felt whole. Her story spread far beyond the courtroom and the headlines. Women wrote to her from across the country, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. Emma realized she had become more than just a woman who escaped her ex-husband's cruelty. She had become a voice, a beacon for others who thought they were alone. She started a foundation to help single mothers, using the donations that poured in after her story went viral. The waitress mocked in a restaurant had become a leader, a mother, a woman admired by thousands. And when she stood on a stage months later, speaking to a room full of women about resilience and dignity, she said the words that defined her journey. "I was told I was nothing, but I discovered that nothing is stronger than a woman who refuses to stay broken." The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering, tears streaming. Emma smiled, holding Hope in her arms backstage, Daniel at her side. Her past was behind her. Her future was radiant. Andrew had lost everything. She had gained everything. Justice was done. Love had triumphed, and Emma's story, once a tragedy, had become a testimony of hope. And as the applause roared around her, Emma knew one thing for certain. She had not only survived, she had won. So our story has come to an end. And yet, if you're still here with us right now, something tells me that this journey touched your heart in a way words alone cannot explain. Maybe you saw yourself in Emma's struggle. Maybe you remembered a time when life felt heavy, unfair, and almost unbearable. And maybe, just maybe, her strength reminded you of your own. Life has a way of breaking us down, but it also offers us the chance to rebuild stronger. The Stoics said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. Emma couldn't control Andrew's cruelty, the whispers of others, or the trials she faced, but she could control how she rose from them. And that choice, to rise, to fight, to believe again, changed everything. Perhaps tonight the message is simple. You are never as weak as the world makes you feel. Your worth is not decided by those who mock you, betray you, or abandon you. It is decided by how you choose to stand, even in the darkest hours. Like Marcus Aurelius said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The pain you endure can become the path to your strength. So if you're listening to this right now, take a deep breath and remind yourself, you are stronger than your past, bigger than your pain, and worthy of a life filled with dignity and love. And if this story gave you even a spark of hope, then let's spread that spark together. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs encouragement, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Because together, we are building not just stories, but a community of hearts that refuse to stay broken.